The world knew Dolly Parton as sunshine itself. The rhinestones and the big laugh, the impossible optimism, the woman who seemed to float above every hardship life could throw at her. For 60 years, she gave the world nothing but joy. And when she passed away on the 25th of August, 2026, at the age of 80, after a brief battle with cancer, the tributes that poured in all said the same thing. There was never anyone like her, and there never will be again. But behind that dazzling, unshakable smile, Dolly Parton once fought a private battle so dark and so painful that she hid it from the world for years. It nearly ended her career. By her own admission, it very nearly ended her life. And for a long time, almost no one knew it was happening at all. This is the secret health battle Dolly Parton kept hidden, the darkest chapter of one of the brightest lives in American history. When the sunshine went dark, to understand how serious it was, you have to go back to the early 1980s. Dolly Parton was at the absolute peak of her fame. She had conquered country music, crossed over into pop with 9 to 5, become a genuine movie star, and built the beginnings of an empire. From the outside, her life looked flawless. And then her own body began to betray her. It started with pain. Severe, relentless abdominal pain, along with heavy bleeding that would not stop. For a woman who prided herself on her stamina, on never missing a show, it became impossible to ignore. In 1982, for the first time in her career, Dolly was forced to cancel a tour because of her health, something that had been unthinkable to her. She was in and out of the hospital. She underwent a series of procedures, and eventually she received a diagnosis. Endometriosis, a painful condition in which tissue similar to the lining of the uterus grows where it should not, causing agony and internal bleeding. The situation grew so severe that, in the mid-1980s, in her late 30s, Dolly underwent a partial hysterectomy to stop the pain and the damage. It is worth remembering how private all of this was at the time. This was an era when women's health, and gynecological conditions in particular, were simply not discussed in public, least of all by a superstar whose entire image was built on glamour and vitality. So Dolly endured much of it quietly, cancelling dates, disappearing from view, letting the public assume she was simply resting, while behind the scenes she was fighting through real physical anguish and multiple hospital stays. The surgery ended the physical crisis, but it came with a permanent and heartbreaking cost. It meant that Dolly Parton, who loved children deeply, would never be able to have any of her own with her husband, Carl Dean. She would later speak about that loss with grace, wondering aloud whether it had been part of some larger plan, telling herself that perhaps she was meant to be out there caring for other people's children instead. Given how much of her later life she devoted to children, through her imagination library and her foundation, there is a bittersweet truth in that. But at the time, it was a devastating blow. One more weight added to a body, and a spirit already stretched to the breaking point. The battle no one could see, and here is where the truly hidden battle began. Because the physical illness was only half of it. Underneath the surgeries and the pain, Dolly Parton was quietly falling apart. She had been running herself into the ground for years, working relentlessly, ignoring her health, pushing through exhaustion. By her own account, she had not been watching what she ate, had not been taking care of herself, and had been carrying a mountain of personal and emotional problems that she never let anyone see. And when her body finally gave out, all of that came crashing down at once. She gained weight. She lost her sense of herself. And she sank into a deep, genuine depression, the kind that the woman famous for her boundless optimism was never supposed to feel. She would later describe it as going to the very bottom, as far down as a person can go in both her emotions and her health. She has said the physical illness and the emotional collapse fed each other, that her body and her mind fell apart at the same time, each one dragging the other down. This was the great secret. While the public saw only the glamorous, smiling star, the private Dolly Parton was in the darkest place of her entire life, and she kept it hidden, because that is what people in the spotlight so often feel they have to do, to keep the mask in place no matter what is happening behind it. There is a particular loneliness in being adored by millions while feeling utterly broken inside. in having to walk out under the lights and perform happiness for a crowd when you can barely get out of bed. Dolly carried that contradiction for years, smiling for the cameras while privately wondering whether she had anything left. The very love and expectation that made her a legend also made it that much harder to admit she was suffering, because how could Dolly Parton, of all people, be anything other than fine? The darkness went further than most people ever realized, and it would be decades before Dolly felt able to talk about it. In the depths of that depression, she reached a point of such despair that she contemplated ending her own life. She has spoken in later years about that terrifying moment, about how close she came to the edge. It is almost impossible to reconcile with the image of the joyful icon the world adored, and that is exactly the point. Depression does not care how famous you are, how beloved, how successful, or how much joy you bring to others. It can find anyone. It found even Dolly Parton. The way back to the light, what saved her, by her own telling, was a moment that felt almost like a message. As she stood at that lowest point, something pulled her back. She came to see the whole ordeal, the illness, the surgery, the depression, as a kind of forced reckoning, a demand that she finally stop and take care of herself. Sometimes she would later say, with her trademark humor, even about the darkest things, God just has to smack you down and tell you to sit still because there is work to be done. And so, slowly, she climbed back. She got healthy. She rebuilt her body and her spirit. She recommitted to her life and her work. And the fact that she recovered while she was still, as she put it, young enough to bounce back, became something she was grateful for until the end of her days. The woman who had nearly given up went on to have some of the most productive and beloved decades of her entire career, building Dollywood into a beloved institution, launching the Imagination Library that put more than 200 million books into the hands of children, and becoming, arguably, the most universally loved figure in American entertainment. For years, she kept the full truth of that dark period to herself. It was only much later, long after she had come through it, that Dolly began to speak openly about what she had endured, about the depression, and the moment she nearly did not survive. And she did it for a reason. She wanted people to understand that money and fame guarantee nothing, that mental health struggles can touch anyone, and that there is no shame in admitting you are hurting. Coming from someone so beloved, that honesty gave permission to countless people fighting their own hidden battles to believe they were not alone. The light she leaves behind. There is something profound in the fact that the woman who symbolized joy more than almost anyone alive had once stood at the very edge of despair and chose to keep going. Her whole life, in a sense, became proof that a person can survive their darkest hour and go on to fill the world with light. The optimism Dolly Parton radiated was not the naive glow of someone who had never suffered. It was the hard-won brightness of someone who had been to the bottom and clawed her way back, and who had decided, having survived, to spend the rest of her days lifting other people up. When she died in August of 2026, following the loss the previous year of Carl Dean, her husband of nearly 6 decades, the world mourned the rhinestones and the songs and the laughter. But the fuller truth of Dolly Parton is even more remarkable than the legend. She was not untouchable. She was not spared. She simply refused to let her darkest battle define her. And she turned even that private pain into something that helped others. The secret she kept hidden for years was not a weakness. In the end, it was the source of her greatest strength. The subjects of depression and suicide touched on in this story are serious ones, and if you or someone you know is struggling, please know that help is available and that reaching out is always worth it. You are never as alone as the darkness would have you believe. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe so you never miss more stories of the people behind the legends.